Gleeds, overseeing our International Dispute Advisory Group. I'm a past president of the CIOB and a fellow of the RICS, and I'm on the national panel of the American Arbitration Association. I'm speaking to you from Atlanta in the States. I'm delighted to introduce this first, our webinar for 2024, where we'll be discussing the delivery of mega projects. Mega and even giga projects are very high profile, enormous in scale, and very ambitious in terms of design, schedule, and logistics. No mention of mega projects can ignore the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where some of the world's most enormous projects are underway. The most well-known of these is probably the Line, which is part of NEOM. Other projects in KSA include Red Sea Project, a tourism mega project, and one called Oxagon, which is a floating city, again part of NEOM. These projects are all part of KSA's Vision 2030 and a programme of infrastructure investment aimed at promoting tourism, clean energy. In this webinar, we'll explore the technical, legal and practical challenges involved with the setup strategy for mega projects. This will be based on our panel's experiences and their opinions on how ambitions of mega projects are realised in practice. Over the year, we're going to run further webinars on the delivery strategy and how mega projects deal with conflict avoidance. So please look out for those during 2024. For any construction project, the setup or implementation strategy is most important, as it sets the direction of travel for the delivery of the project and can ultimately affect the extent to which there may be disputes between the contract parties. Given the size and scope of mega projects, the setup strategy becomes even more important. Today, we've assembled an international panel who combine legal, technical and practice experience. The panel will share their experience of mega projects and provide insight for the benefit of our attendees today. The panel will discuss implementation strategies that parties might consider when setting up mega projects. All of this in order to achieve project ambitions and minimise the potential for both progressive and subsequent disputes. So before I introduce today's panelists, we've got a poll for you, and we'll run the poll right now. So what should be prioritised for the attendees this one? What should be prioritised when setting up mega projects? And you'll see a box on your screen. Schedule, cost, quality, resourcing and logistics, safety and welfare, or all of the above. And we'll give you attendees a minute or two to select your options. I'm told the poll results will appear in the chat box if you would like to view them.
Yeah, we've got very high percentage for all of the above, Chris, currently about 87, 86%. And those that are not selecting all of the above are going for schedule, about 7%, with a couple of votes on other issues. So all of the above is a very clear leader.
That's interesting, and thanks for that commentary, Alex. Yes, I can see that. And quite rightly so, but I think from my perspective, of course, safety and welfare is always paramount on any construction project, but all of the above are primary considerations when setting up mega projects. There's not a surprising answer, but I would also say that safety and welfare in this day and age, absolutely everybody has to go home safe from any construction project anywhere in the world. So thank you for that, everyone. We'll allow some time to answer your live questions today and after the panel discussion. So please feel free to ask us any questions or tell us about the issues you're facing on your projects. Please submit your questions using the Q&A function, and we'll attempt to get to as many of those as possible during question time. Our panel today again consists of legal and technical experts from Freeths and Gleeds who have experience in dealing with all aspects of mega projects, from setup to delivery and conflict avoidance. We have special pleasure of welcoming our guest speaker, Galal Haney, the country director for Gleeds in Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Galal, of course, has first-hand experience of the exceptional projects currently underway and under development in the Kingdom. Gleeds and Freeths have joined forces to create Construction Disputes A to Z. This is an initiative where we offer one-stop technical, contractual and legal service to clients. We made available our marketing material on this initiative as a handout for this webinar. So if it raises any issues on your projects where you think we could help, or you think you may have need of our services, please don't hesitate to email us. Our email addresses are on the slide you can see on screen. Alternatively, connect with us on LinkedIn and we'll be happy to have a no obligations discussion about any issues you may be facing. I also wanted to mention that our previous webinars are now available to view on the Gleeds YouTube channel. This one will be too once we finish. Just go to YouTube and search for Gleeds and select videos. So let's move on with the main business, and I'll let the speakers introduce themselves this morning. Firstly, Alex.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Chris. Nice to be with you again. My name's Alex Johnson. I'm a construction and engineering lawyer with Freeths, and I'm based in the UK, but my experience is international. I've worked for clients on their projects all over the world, and I've worked on a number of construction disputes for projects in the Gulf region, the wider Middle East, and for clients that are based in Europe as well as the USA. Mainly, I handle conflict avoidance and dispute resolution by international arbitration, but I also draft and negotiate contracts for clients, and I advise them on issues that arise during the project. My experience of mega projects to date includes infrastructure for Olympic Games, for example, for major oil and gas plants, and also Greenfield International Airport.
Thank you, Alex, and good to have you with us again. John.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm John Refat. I'm a director of Gleeds Egypt. I'm a chartered conservator. I'm a member of Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, a board member of Egypt RICS Advisory Board. I'm having over 20 years of international experience in the field of project and cost management and dispute resolution and high-profile projects within large developers, cost consultant, and first-tier contractors at senior level in the MENA region. I have been personally involved in several mega projects, such as the development of Dubai Festival City in UAE, Cairo Festival City, Marasi and Seoul projects in Egypt, 18 project in Pakistan, King Salman Park, and Shusha Island projects in KSA, among others.
Thank you, John. And our special guest today, Galal.
Thanks, Chris. Hello, everyone. Pleasure to have you all here. I'm Galal, the country director for Gleeds Saudi Arabia, leading the business operations, delivery and growth in the kingdom. I'm a chartered quantity surveyor coming from a mechanical engineering background, member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, and a member of Gleeds Middle East Board. I specialize in cost and commercial setup and planning of mega projects across a variety of sectors, which I've previously delivered in a number of geographies, including the Middle East, North Africa, Europe, Latin America. And I consider myself blessed and very lucky to be here in Saudi Arabia, probably the most active and innovative built environment around the globe at the moment, where I lead the Gleeds team planning and delivering some of Vision 2030 iconic and ambitious programs, such as various regions or projects in NEOM, like Oxygen, various projects in Gulf of Aqaba, some of the NEOM Islands, King Salman Park, few projects in Draya Gate, Al Ola, Gidea, and others. And it's a pleasure talking to you all today. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Galal, and welcome to our webinar series.
Thank you.
A little bit on our questions policy. Please remember to submit your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll leave some time at the end to try and answer them. But past experience tells us we won't get to them all. So if you have any questions or issues you would like to discuss after the webinar, please email us. We'll be showing our contact details again at the end of the webinar. Alternatively, just connect with us on LinkedIn and ask us your questions directly. So on with the main discussion today. First question, how do we approach the setup strategy for these huge, ambitious project delivery programs? And we'll go to Alex first.
Thank you, Chris. Well, on this panel, I'm probably the least qualified to comment on that, as typically, as our viewers will be aware, lawyers probably only become involved once the setup strategy for a project has been determined by the technical team. And when it comes to disputes, often this would be a long time after that has happened. But we do sometimes advise clients on the decisions that they make relating to setup strategy, and also on the decisions that follow from the setup strategy. So in my experience as a lawyer, there are a number of factors that influence setup strategy for projects. And with mega projects, I think those factors are amplified by the fact that the projects concerned tend to be high profile, tend to be government funded, and they're in the public eye. So they are subject to levels of scrutiny that will exceed that for most conventional construction projects. So for that reason, as well as others, I think approaching the setup strategy in such a way as to enable the project to succeed is the key. So in any construction project, there will inevitably be challenges, there will be unforeseen events, and how those challenges and events are best managed once they are encountered, I think often goes back to the project setup. Mega projects, as we're all aware, usually have ambitious scale, they have ambitious schedule, and typically there's an early statement made about completing the project by a specific date, and so all of the stakeholders are working towards that date. So speed, in many cases, I think influences setup strategy, as it's important for the project to be seen to be progressing as soon as possible, so that everybody knows the project is actually happening. And of course, for some projects, the deadlines are hard, which creates more of a challenge. So for projects that are associated with an event like the FIFA 2022 World Cup in Qatar or the London 2012 Olympic Games, for example, which I worked on as a junior lawyer, those are projects that have very definitive end dates, and you can't move the end date. So the timing is critically important. I think that getting mega projects out of the ground is a key challenge, because that's important in showing the world that the progress is being made. So often, in order to do that, there needs to be enabling works packages, which themselves are usually also very sizable construction projects. So, for example, it may be that an airport has to be constructed to bring the people to the site in the first place. Or it may be that plants have to be constructed to deliver fresh water to the site, and also other utilities. So the setup strategy has to also take all of that into account, and take into account what enabling works packages will be needed, and what order will they be required in order that everything else will follow that. So pulling all of that together, where projects have to meet very ambitious delivery programs and are themselves very ambitious, it's important not to neglect the setup, because gaps in the setup strategy are likely to lead to disputes during the construction phase, because that's where the plan meets the reality. And I think that's a fact of construction projects. It can't always be avoided, but having a plan for how to mitigate and resolve the issues that will arise during the project is very important. And for the reason that those issues cannot risk derailing the project when everybody's committed to a deadline and very public statements are being made. So from a lawyer's perspective, I think a successful setup strategy is one that keeps the project moving when dealing with unforeseen events and challenges, and also, of course, in circumstances where parties might not always agree with each other.
Thank you, Alex. So pay attention to the greater exposure of mega projects. Have a dispute resolution and mitigation plan, and watch out for huge enabling works that can be very large in their own right. So moving on, John, what's your take on setup strategy? How do we approach setup strategy for these huge projects?
Chris, I generally recommend starting by writing a project execution plan or an implementation plan. It's a written document that outline the needed team steps to accomplish a goal or a project. Having such documents actually helps the team members and key stakeholders to understand all aspects of the project before executing it. And although implementation plans differ from one project to another, there are several components you may find in common. Creating an implementation plan for your projects means that you have an actionable roadmap for the whole project and mechanism actually to help the team members, stakeholders, and hold them accountable. Simplifies the communication, offer transparency. The steps to build an implementation plan are simple. You just need to define your project goals, what actually the team need to accomplish, and then define the outcome and deliverables. Also, you need to define the key performance indicators, KPI, that will determine how your project is measured and monitored at every stage. Assess potential risk, because every project carries with it some risks that may affect the outcome. So risk may include unforeseen delays, cost overruns, other changes in the industries that the project affects. You need to set tasks and due dates, start by breaking down actually the project into actionable steps, and you need to determine what is the actual deadlines and reasonable deadlines for each step, and then assign team members' roles and responsibilities. You need to consider, while doing this, your team members' strengths, experience, taking this into account when assigning these tasks, as well as their availability during the project duration. Assemble all the above points into a one comprehensive document. The more efforts we put during strategic planning stage of a project delivery process, the more effective and less problematic subsequent stages will be. It's worth bringing to our audience attention that when there is a doubt about a particular aspect of your project, please conduct additional research and also consult subject matter expert. It is important to centralize communication so that everyone will receive the project updates and announcement at the same time. I have seen project drifted away because communication was not running smooth at the beginning or establishment stage of it. Back to you, Chris.
Thank you, John. That's super advice on having a well thought through project execution plan and a roadmap. And I always cite that, who would start on a journey without having a well-planned route and schedule? So moving on from that, Galal, from the coalface, how do we approach the setup strategy for ambitious project delivery?
I try to keep my input as practical as possible, but generally construction or built environment projects setup demands solid foundations, just as like the buildings themselves. So it is imperative to define and understand the key project objectives and priorities. And I would assume, for example, most of you answered as Alex mentioned, more than 80% answered the poll question by all of the above. While this might sound ideal, practically it is not achievable. Hence, I consider this aspiration one of the most common pitfalls, because simply if we consider the golden triangle of cost, quality, and time, it is not possible to achieve the maximum potential of all three of them at the same time. However, good project planning and setup strategy is the art of striking the balance between all three parameters and creating a tailored model for each and every project. Hence, being realistic and well-informed is essential for the objectives definition, which typically starts at the inception of the project, and it's a collaborative effort combining the wider project team, including your stakeholders, your strategy consultants, cost consultant, enterprise PMO, real estate economists, legal advisors, and others. Unfortunately, the investment in consultancy fees and time allowed for this strategic definition stage might be underestimated or rushed in many cases. Despite that, at this early stage, there's the largest window of opportunity to optimize your project and maximize the value of the project at minimal time or cost. Because as the project progresses, some of the levers you had at this early stage either drops or they are no longer available, or they would have a drastic effect changing the project course. And over the last year, Gleeds Saudi Arabia has been involved in the setup of a number of announced and unannounced mega projects. And I'm glad to say, and I'm proud to say that here in Saudi Arabia, a lot of attention and investment is allocated to the initial setup stage of the projects, and at this strategic definition stage and feasibility stages to ensure that the project is set up properly. In terms of going back to your question, Chris, on the approach, regardless of how big the project is, I think we should always go back to basics at the setup stage, where the following should be considered. I would start with cost. And we need to keep in mind that projects are investments, and hence most projects aim to generate profit, whether directly through the project itself or indirectly through a related project. Yes, there are a few projects that would be driven by a national or strategic objective, and even for such projects, profitability is an important parameter that you cannot neglect. It is common for projects to be estimated, or project capex to be underestimated, especially that reducing your capex is the easiest way to, let's say, increase your internal return on investment, or IRR, which would look or make your project look more appealing. However, if this initial estimation is not as comprehensive as possible and set in a way following the recognized industry standards, it can jeopardize the whole project at a later stage after you've already spent time and money on consultancy or on developing this project. Therefore, again, it's very important to set a robust budget, and while setting this budget, I think our counsel is always to consider recent market testing or market advice, because especially here in the kingdom, the market is booming and going through substantial transition, and hence always we need recent market data. Consider what is the procurement strategy for your project, or the procurement strategies for your project, because the risk allocation between the client and the contractor would definitely affect your cost, and also the design fees, where you're going to allocate them. Also to consider sufficient provisional and allowances and contingencies to make sure you have a comprehensive budget. And a good cost consultant would ensure that their client understand what would that contingency or even provisional allowance cover. Also to make your forecast as realistic as possible, considering the current market trends, the availability of resources, contractors' appetite, and construction trends generally. Another common issue at this stage is the tendency to delve into deep details of while developing your estimate, and delving into the nitty-gritties of everything in good faith. But yes, it might sound good, but actually it can easily distract you from the bigger picture, and some key items can be totally missed while focusing on just the nitty-gritty of a certain item. Therefore, trying to build a detailed item or itemized estimate based on high-level master plan information will inevitably lead to cost centers being missed, because the estimation methodology should reflect the amount of information or the maturity of the information you have, which you can see reflected in all cost estimation standards. It keeps things at high level at this stage to make it as comprehensive as possible. Finally, it is important to read the fine print and understand what are your budget exclusions and risks, and ensure this is covered in your development budget generally. That's for cost. Maybe time, I'll just comment briefly on time. There has to be an understanding of the project conditions and specifics, complemented by benchmarks of similar projects and assumptions to set up a realistic program at the beginning. If any of the project setup and delivery stages are rushed, they will certainly come back and prolong subsequent stages. The work has to be done, whether now or later, it will come back. If there's a necessity to accelerate projects to meet certain deadlines or important events, as Alex mentions, for example, the World Cup event, it is essential that the cost and quality implications are understood and considered. That's everything from my side, Chris.
Thank you, Gilal. That's super advice, and I particularly liked your solid foundations analogy, which we all understand in the construction industry. Also, exercise realism and beware of optimism bias. And your points on the financial investment viability of each project were also well made. So let's move on to the second question, a very broad one, and you've heard that mentioned in the first one. What procurement models are optimal for delivering mega projects? And of course, that might be many procurement models. Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I mean, it depends on what makes delivery optimal, which is a very lawyerly thing to say. But what I mean by that is that clearly being on time, being on budget, and zero defects would be the ideal. But it's also likely to be unrealistic, as Gilal was suggesting. So each of those golden triangle type points are likely to be overrun to some degree or another. So generally, I think the procurement models that prioritize speed arguably at the expense of the other important things like budget and quality, are the models that I tend to see adopted for mega project delivery. Traditional procurement or design bid build in US terms is generally a slower process, so it's less suited to mega project delivery. So usually it's some form of design build procurement, which is more typical, probably with the owner tendering contract packages against either initial or preliminary designs. And the problems with that type of model are well known. They come from when the tender designs are not realistic. And so amendment is required, which often takes the form of claims for change orders. And there's the classic struggle between what constitutes design development, whereas what constitutes change. So in my experience on several projects in the Middle East and elsewhere, you can quite often trace a dispute back to the quality of the original design and what the contractor had tendered, which is often exacerbated in a market where it's the lowest price bid that wins the contract, of course. I'd also mention management contracting as a model that enables an early start on site before completion of the design. So this is where an owner appoints a management contractor who then directly appoints the works contracts. The management contractor doesn't have a construction role, but they are managing the construction works that are carried out by the separate works contractors. And that model lends itself to mega projects because the separation of works into packages is a necessity, given the size and the scale of these projects. And the packages themselves can then be a mix of procurements. It could be design build, it could be installation, it could be supply, etc. The main drawback for the owner in this is that the success of the project depends on how good the management contractor is. Because unlike construction management, which is very similar, the owner doesn't engage the works contractors directly, so doesn't have control over them. And to balance that statement, conversely, I've experienced of a mega project dispute, which was construction management, which is, as I said, a similar form of procurement, but it's where the owner directly contracts with the works contractors with a manager in play as well. And in that case, issues that had been caused by the construction manager flowed into all of the works contracts. So that left the owner dealing with the problems because in that model, it carried the risk. So I think in summary, in my view, management contracting done properly is probably an effective model for delivering mega projects.
Thank you, Alex. And I should mention that construction management is management contracting in the US terms, and also that the multiple prime scenario was what we would call that in the States over here. So probably the most mega projects will have a mixture of all these models due to their size and all the packages. But I think good advice there. Consider all the drivers carefully and take the time to structure the procurement strategy to suit all the facets of a mega project. So, John, what procurement models are optimal for delivering mega projects? What's your take on that?
First, I think Alex should become a project manager before he should shift from low. Chris, procurement strategy defines what needs to be done to fulfill a project objectives and assure value for money. And there is no doubt that one size fits it all procurement approach is very unlikely to utterly fit in each particular case, as every project is a unique product, vary from one to another in some distinct way. So hence procurement routes will be selected adequately only after in-depth understanding of the specific needs and constraints for both the client and the project, which can be achieved through discussion with the client in addition to knowledge of the market conditions and other variable conditions. In context of mega project, giga projects, and other highly complex and large-scale project, high-speed construction projects as well, the traditional procurement routes prove to be a bit costly for clients seeking to meet the unique program budget and resourcing requirement, which is definitely necessitated by such project. While relationship contracting models actually offers a better solution to the project procurement and delivery. There is a couple of models which I have seen recently. The main three popping up is, the first one is the multi-stage contracting or early contractor involvement, where you appoint a contractor in advance of the intended commencement of construction of the works. This will allow the contractor to perform the design and pre-construction services, having both the client and the contractor together, where using this contractor expertise in procurement strategy, finalizing the client requirement, having also his input in the design, and enabling a more competition and contractor incentivization and design responsibilities. Another model which Alex was stating about, which is management contracting. Actually, the management contracting model enables flexibility, optimized risk allocation, also alignment of objectives, and reduce administrative burdens of the client. The third model is the delivery partnering, where the client engage one or more contractors to perform works or services, and typically broadly defined under a project management service under traditional forms of contract, and additionally require all contractors to enter into a delivery partner agreement with the client and to add additional layers of project-wide obligation and incentives. This can typically include requirements such as for the contractors to form one unified delivery partner and act as a single point of responsibility for all scopes of works and services being procured of the project, or to have an incentive regime that implements a gain share and potentially a pain share mechanism to align the objective of the client with those of the delivery partners throughout the delivery of the entire project. The benefit include for this model enhanced incentivization and alignment of objectives, as well as cooperation between the client and each contractor moves. Back to you, Chris.
Thank you, John, and some good advice there on specific approaches. And once again, consider the objectives and tailor project delivery to suit. And we often conduct what I call clean sheet of paper project delivery workshops, and they can be quite exhaustive for mega projects. Galal, procurement models from the coalface again. What are you seeing?
Well, I don't think there's a simple answer to that, because mega projects essentially are a bundle of multiple projects or multiple packages, maybe packaged under one name, but there are so many different packages in there. And with that quantum of packages or even sub projects, there's no one size fits all. I think every mega project requires its own, let's say, master procurement strategy. Yes, that would say that the overall direction the project is adopting, and tailoring maybe the high level strategy for each package or each sub project. And this was obviously this will vary subject to the size and complexity and time and cost constraints of every package, whether it's we want to go for a traditional procurement offering cost certainty, balanced risk, not expecting cost premiums and control over the design quality to the last minute, or maybe a more specialist type of project or complex one where the client wishes to push most of the risks towards design, towards the contractor on a design and build setup, yet willing to accept the cost premium that will come with that, and the very unforgiving nature of variations if the client brief is not set to reflect exactly what they want. Or if we're looking for a fast track project where we need design and construction to overlap, so we go to some of the management routes, whether construction management or management contracting. Hence, it has to be tailored for each and every projects. In the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, we've witnessed impressive development over the last few years in the maturity of the market from a procurement perspective, with more collaborative approaches being introduced, such as early contractor engagement, pay and gain share, as John mentioned, delivery partnership, and other hybrid procurement models.
Thank you, Gilal, and liking the master procurement strategy idea there, overlaying everything. And once again, collaborative approaches and balanced risk profiles, pain and gain sharing, and even excuse me, hybrid projects mentioned. So let's move on to the third question now. now, and we're moving in a little bit legal. What contract issues should be considered when setting up mega projects? Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I mean, the essential golden rule is you need to have a written contract. If there's no written contract, then the law that governs any construction dispute is not always clear, especially when owner, contractor, project site may all be in different locations or jurisdictions. And without a contract, the first part of any dispute is unfortunately an expensive argument about which law applies in the first place. And in terms of the contracts themselves, in my experience, it's generally best from the point of view of aiming to reduce or minimize potential for disputes that parties observe 3 rules. The first rule is try to avoid what I call patchwork contracts, which is taking parts of other contracts and sticking them together to create a new contract. So it can be very tempting to do that because you may wish to take documents or drafting that worked well on one particular project and use it on the next project. But without thinking about how the new contract will work holistically in the context of that particular project, this can be a dangerous approach. So it's always best to either produce a contract properly tailored to the project in question, or use a standard form of contract with some properly lawyered amendments tailored towards that project. And the risk of the patchworking of contracts is that you can end up with incomplete, ambiguous, or inconsistent contracts, all factors which are often prominent in construction disputes and make those disputes more complicated and expensive. On a similar point, second rule, try to avoid the kitchen sink approach to producing contracts, by which I mean throwing all sorts of documents into a contract without there necessarily being a contractual purpose or an explanation for doing that. So it's very common to see pre-contract documents like correspondence, meeting minutes, reports included in a contract, but without any real reason for doing that. And the problem this causes is when those documents conflict with each other, it becomes unclear as to what the parties have actually agreed. And again, this has potential to cause disputes, or it may make disputes more costly, because a question for any court or tribunal will be, how do you make sense of the contract and what is the contract? And final rule, try to avoid incorporating too many documents by reference into a contract, which the problem this causes is it can make understanding what the totality of the contract is rather difficult. If you are bringing documents in by reference, which themselves bring in documents by reference, the category and class of documents that form the contract can be quite extensive and unclear. And as an example, a dispute I worked on last year had all of those elements. And so a substantial amount of lawyer time was invested simply trying to work out the totality of the contract between the parties. In other words, working out what it was they had agreed. And there was no definitive answer. And so that exposed both parties to the risks that arose from the fact that the contract they made was not fully certain. So for mega projects, I would suggest properly lawyered and put together contracts are an absolute essential. And interfacing and packaging issues also require careful consideration. So for packaging, I think it's important to ensure that contract packages are realistic and workable. So for example, grouping packages by a work type rather than by a location is an issue that I've seen cause issues. So for example, where the working locations on a large project were so widely spread out that they couldn't all be worked on at the same time, that caused schedule delay. Whereas actually they were all just a particular type of work. So there's a balance to strike between the realistic contract packaging and also, of course, making those packages appealing to the contractors bidding for the work. And as an example of interface issues, on a plant dispute that I worked on several years ago, there were several EPC packages all working next to each other to construct the plant, but the interfacing requirements and coordination requirements were very limited. So each contractor was essentially responsible up to their site boundary, but not really any further than that. And so the result of that was a sequence of change orders for each contractor, because without that, you wouldn't have a plant that had been effectively properly connected together.
Thank you, Alex, and important advice there on looking at the interface between all the packages on mega projects and make sure they dovetail properly. And realism and workability again, a theme I picked up on: don't mix and match and avoid the kitchen sink approach. And then if you must consider and establish lots of documents, then establish the hierarchy, I think, is important. So which documents would prevail in the event they were conflicted if you are going to put a significant number of documents in. So what contract issues should be considered? John, over to you. What's your take as a quantity surveyor?
I actually will echo what Alex said. You need to make sure that you have a clear, well-written contracts in place. As in my experience, disputes generally occur where contracts have been poorly drafted, or the people on the ground have to read the contract and make assumptions. Using standard contracts form in construction projects are crucial. It helps standardizing procedures for large international projects. However, the extent to which legal systems support these contracts depend on the specific terms included in the contract and the degree to which national law upholds the enforceability of contractual obligation. In civil law countries, for example, Egypt, if the contracts include provisions that are contradicting with a mandatory rule of the law, this will cause problems, and it is important for parties administrating the contract again to obtain proper legal advice. It is essential from my point of view to get legal advice considering the amount of money being spent on such mega or giga projects to safeguard the clients from potential risks in the later stages. I would also suggest that a lawyer should be appointed to check the drafted contract actually works and actually function for the intended purpose. Back to you, Chris.
Thank you, John. So again, well-written contracts, and watch out for mandatory rules of law in the country where the mega project is, and again, get legal advice. Galal, what should you look for in Saudi Arabia on contract issues?
Well, I think Alex covered it all essentially, but in Saudi, our counsel or our typical advice to our clients is to try to use locally recognized and practiced forms of contracts to reduce any chance of misinterpretation that would later on generate variations or disputes, and also will de-risk the job for the contractors. And the part that I'm sure Alex won't really appreciate, it will also reduce your legal costs because it's been tried and tested before. Also to try to maintain the balance in the standard forms of contracts. As most of you know, you've got the general conditions and the particular conditions that you draft for each job. And while drafting the particulars, we need to be very careful with maintaining the balance, because if you distort this balance, this will eventually lead to more risks or more ambiguity, which would definitely be reflected in the cost you get back from the market. Also to look into more collaborative forms of contracts, especially on those mega projects, because by virtue of the size or the quantum of those jobs, even a balanced contract still imposes a substantial amount of risk to bidders. Hence, a more collaborative approach helps de-risk the project for the bidders, which would increase the appetite to bid for the job and also generate more competitive bids from a cost or commercial perspective. Also to explore how to make it easier for international players to come to the market, and essentially this can be done by using internationally recognized forms of contracts, also international forms of alternative dispute resolution. And speaking of which, it is worth mentioning that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, who's a 1952 New York Convention signatory, has made great progress and noticeable progress over the last few years in the field of arbitration and actually enforcing arbitral awards. And for you that would like to check the number of arbitral awards enforced by Saudi courts in the last few years, you'd see that it's growing very, very quickly. Finally, it is very important to ensure that the contract reflects any discussions before signing the contract and any agreements done. For example, post-tender clarifications. As simple as it sounds and as straightforward as it sounds, in many cases it doesn't happen. It gets missed in good faith because people think they are going to continue working on the same job or on the same project until it's done. And likely this changes people will move to new companies or to new projects, and hence it is very important to have everything documented in a new contract to make sure it reflects any agreements made for the contract, because this eventually can lead to disputes down the line. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Gilal. And it's interesting to hear somewhat diverging advocacy there, where the quantity surveyors are advocating standard forms of contracts that parties understand and that everybody's familiar with. But lawyers, of course, often like to fix up the standard forms, which is, you can see the two professions advocating slightly different things. Also, the progress made in Saudi on arbitration and the New York Convention is an interesting one. So that seems to be a terrific progress. And accommodation of international entities is an interesting perspective from Gilal there. Of course, when you're doing these mega projects, people assembling from all over the world, different entities helping put them together. So it's good to see that there's an endeavor to accommodate international entities. So let's move on to the fourth question, very broad question here. So what overall challenges should parties consider when setting up mega projects? And let's move to Alex first again.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think the biggest issue for me as a lawyer is to ensure there's a strategy for dealing with problems as they arise. When there are ambitious schedules and budgets, the last thing that a mega project needs is for energy and resources to become consumed in claims and disputes at the expense of actually completing the project. Now, typically, disputes are usually saved up until the end of the project for that, as well as other reasons. But on a mega project, I think there's an argument for ensuring that disputes are resolved as the project continues, and so that it may continue its progress. And I think the concept of putting the project first is key in my view. So sometimes in mega projects, I've seen dispute boards used, and they can be an effective means of resolving disputes that arise during the project. And the scale and scope of these projects often justifies the expense of having the dispute board throughout the project. It doesn't apply in all cases. For example, the London 2012 Olympic Games contracts provided for an independent disputes advisory board with a bespoke process aimed at resolving disputes without risking the progress of the project. Particularly important in that example because, as I said, the deadline can't be moved. And those familiar with the FIDIC suite of contracts, the 2017 Silver Book, for example, contains a dispute avoidance and adjudication board as part of its standard drafting. Although, alluding to the point you just made, in my experience, it often gets deleted in favor of moving more directly to arbitration. But I think for mega projects, the concept of the DAAB is probably sensible, and it merits inclusion, as if you look at its processes, they're relatively quick. The board will be familiar with the project, and of course the aim is to avoid disputes, not to end up in a dispute. And the parties can call upon the DAAB to provide its assistance, to have informal discussions, and to attempt to resolve issues or disagreements that arise during the course of the project. And then when it comes to formal disputes, a dispute with a capital D can be referred to the DAAB that gives the decision within 84 days of receiving the reference, and the decision is then binding. But if a party is dissatisfied with the decision, it can notify that, and then it can proceed to arbitration in the usual way. So I think my view for mega projects, a DAAB or something similar is probably an effective way of ensuring the project stays on track. But of course, it requires the parties to include those provisions in the contract to begin with. And I think using the DAAB is preferable to the risk that if a dispute arises, it could hamper progress, because given the size of these projects, a party may not realistically be able to afford to leave it until the end of the project to contest it. And so the disruptive effect could be greater.
Thanks, Alex, and super advice there on project resolution structures and strategies. Over to John. John, what are the major challenges you think parties should consider on mega projects?
Chris, we always advise to do engineering and risk analysis before starting construction. This is generally often stated but rarely followed, yet doing so clearly improves project performance. Most project development organizations or project sponsors are reluctant to spend significant amount of money on early stage engineering and design because they often lack funds at the early stage. They are eager to break ground and start construction. They worry that this design might be modified at later stages, so why to spend this money up front? Our previous experience indicates that if project developers spend 3 to 5% of the project capital cost on early stage engineering and design, it tends to actually produce far better results in on-time and on-budget delivery. This is because the design process will often raise challenges that need to be resolved before construction start, saving time and money at later stages. Also, building a project team with the right mix of abilities, as without a well-resourced and qualified network of project managers, cost managers, advisors, controllers, project will not deliver the best possible result and return on investment, and at the worst, it will fail. Investors and owners need to be taking an active role in putting together the project team. They need to create a detailed, particular approach to deal with the outcomes, such as managing quality risk, escalating contractor cost, replacing a high-tech supplier, for example. An experienced project manager is not enough. Players must be assembled, or they need to assemble the team that has all required skills, including legal and technical expertise. Contract managers, cost managers, project managers, different stakeholders, actually to provide the required deliverables and achieve the project goals at the end.
Thanks, John. And building the right project team, the importance of which is often overlooked, most important there. I think the other thing that cropped up a minute or two ago was watch out for on a mega project, which might go 5, 10, 15, or even 20 years. Those teams will obviously change. So the importance of continuity of teams, given the personnel changes, which will inevitably happen for lots of reasons. So challenges, Galal. What do you think we should consider the most on mega projects?
Well, in addition to what we mentioned on the first one from our being realistic, cost and time constraints, all of that, I totally echo what John and Chris said. But you do not come across such projects many times in your life. Maybe for us in Saudi, it is different, as we're blessed to witness this transformation. But again, they are very unique projects, in many cases bringing unprecedented concepts to reality. And therefore, I strongly believe that the whole project team needs to be flexible, dynamic, and adaptive, with the mindset that there's nothing set in stone. Even your project strategy or your financial model. In fact, I strongly recommend that the project setup is revisited regularly with each and every milestone, as it, just like value engineering or value management, it's an iterative process that you go through on the, let's say, the pre-construction cycle. Also, it is important to keep in mind also to try and control the optimism bias. For example, if a project is running over budget and the financial model is not returning the desired or the planned IRR at a certain milestone, this needs to be addressed immediately with a clear value management plan, or even revisiting the whole model, maybe your asset typology mix that is generating your revenues, instead of assuming that this will be picked up or rectified at a later stage. Yes, in many cases, this can be optimized on the line during the design stage of the project. However, since we are considering mega projects, the stakes of abortive works can be very high, and also most of these projects are delivered using public money, and therefore we have to be very extra careful with that. Therefore, I think we should always be pragmatic and avoid being emotional about our projects. And believe me, I totally understand the excitement when you see new projects with beautiful, fancy CGIs, but it needs to be set up properly and practical and, let's say, profitable. In the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, for example, project profitability is always checked and rechecked and tested to ensure all details have been captured, and this project is actually well studied, and enough thought has been put in there for the project to actually proceed. And again, and finally, I would reiterate what I previously mentioned about making the best use of the window you have at the very beginning of the project to smoothly make changes at this early strategic definition stage, and to be realistic and prioritize the objectives, understand that you cannot achieve everything at the same time, and ensure that all project stakeholders and team members are involved and contributing to the projects and communicating properly without working in silos.
Thank you, Galal, and I wanted to thank you especially for bringing your experience from the Kingdom to our webinar today. It's been invaluable. Few takeaways there: continuous evaluation of project goals, revisit and update the project execution plan regularly, watch out for optimism bias, build in collaboration, flexibility as a mantra, have progressive dispute resolution programs with dispute adjudication and advisory boards or something similar, so that they can be resolved on a progressive basis and don't affect the conclusion of the project. I think always, from Galal there, always be proactive, realistic and pragmatic. So tremendous advice from all of our panel there today. So unfortunately, we're headed towards the last few minutes. I don't think we'll have a chance for any questions here. So I'd like to thank the CIOB and the RICS and the ACCE for their support of this webinar. If anything we discussed today raises any questions or concerns on your projects, please email us again, and our email addresses are on the slide, or connect with us on LinkedIn and ask us a question directly. I'll just go to the panelists for a second there. Alex, do you have anything to close with there?
No, I echo your statements, Chris. I think it was great to hear from Galal about what's going on in Saudi Arabia and the challenges that they are dealing with there. And yeah, all sounds very interesting. But I think the points you accurately summarized.
Thank you, Alex. John, any closing statement?
I would like to thank our audience for their time and hope they have benefited from what we have said. Hopefully they will take some of these points while establishing their next strategy for a mega project.
And Galal, last but not least at all.
Thank you everyone thank you first of all for hosting me today, and thank you everyone for attending. And I'm sure I will roll through across sometime in another project.
Okay, thanks to our panel, and we truly hope this session's been valuable to you, and thank you all for attending, and goodbye from our teams in Atlanta, London, Cairo, Riyadh, and even Melbourne. Thank you all. Bye-bye.